Number 1. Genene Jones was a pediatric nurse in Texas during the early 1980s, trusted by parents and praised by coworkers. But behind her calm demeanor hid a horrifying secret. She was responsible for the deaths of over 60 infants under her care. Babies would mysteriously suffer cardiac arrest after routine checkups, and Genene was always the first to respond, trying to revive them. What no one knew was that she had intentionally injected them with deadly drugs like succinylcholine and digoxin, causing their sudden collapse. Investigators later concluded she suffered from Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a rare psychological disorder where caregivers harm others to gain sympathy and praise for saving them. Genene craved admiration so badly that she was willing to sacrifice innocent lives for it. Her crimes were finally exposed after the death of a healthy baby girl named Chelsea McClellan in 1982. Traces of succinylcholine were found in the baby's system, a drug known to cause paralysis and stop the heart. Genene was arrested and sentenced to 99 years in prison. But years later, outrage erupted when she became eligible for early release due to a Texas law designed to ease prison overcrowding. In response, prosecutors charged her with additional crimes. In 2020, she pleaded guilty to a second murder and was sentenced to life again, ensuring she would never be free. Genene Jones was not a savior. She was a calculated killer in scrubs, a woman who turned hospitals into hunting grounds. Her legacy is one of betrayal, not healing. Number 2. Aileen Wuornos was an American serial killer who became one of the most infamous female murderers in U.S. history. Between 1989 and 1990, she murdered 7 men across Florida. Working as a prostitute, she claimed each killing was self-defense against men who tried to harm her. But the evidence told a darker story. Aileen lured her victims with the promise of sex, then shot them with a .22 caliber pistol, robbed them, and dumped their bodies in wooded areas. Most of the men were found unclothed or partially clothed, shot multiple times. Her childhood was filled with pain. She was abandoned at a young age, mistreated by her guardians, and forced to survive on her own as a teenager. She turned to prostitution to survive and lived a chaotic life full of anger and mistrust. Psychologists later diagnosed her with severe personality disorders. While Aileen insisted she only killed in self-defense, prosecutors argued the murders were planned and driven by her inner rage. She was arrested in 1991 and quickly confessed, though her version of events kept changing. In prison, her behavior became increasingly unstable, with wild accusations and emotional outbursts. In 2002, she was executed by lethal injection. Her final words were chilling. "I'm sailing with the rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day." Aileen Wuornos showed no clear remorse, just emotional chaos, deep trauma, and a legacy that made her both a monster in the public eye and a tragic product of a broken past. Number 3. Dorothea Puente was a seemingly kind elderly landlady in Sacramento, California, running a boarding house that catered to the elderly, disabled, and mentally ill. To those around her, she offered a grandmotherly presence, feeding the homeless, handing out cookies, always wearing a warm smile. But behind that sweet exterior lay a chilling secret. Between 1982 and 1988, she murdered at least 9 of her tenants. Dorothea drugged them with sleeping pills, suffocated them, and buried their bodies in her backyard. The motive? Greed. She forged their Social Security checks and pocketed their benefits, targeting the vulnerable and forgotten. Her crimes went undetected until a concerned social worker noticed a missing resident. authorities exhumed 7 bodies from her property and found she had stolen thousands of dollars. Dorothea attempted to flee, but was arrested soon after. At trial, she appeared unemotional, maintaining her innocence to the end. She was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole and died behind bars in 2011. Dorothea Puente wasn't the caring caretaker she portrayed. She was a predator hiding in plain sight, turning her home into a graveyard for profit. Number 4. Juana Barraza was a Mexican professional wrestler turned serial killer, known as La Mataviejitas, the little old lady killer. Behind her powerful frame and wrestling mask was a predator who terrorized elderly women in Mexico City. Between the late 1990s and 2006, she murdered at least 17 victims, though some estimates put the number at over 40. Juana targeted women over 60, often posing as a government worker or social worker to gain their trust. Once inside their homes, she would strangle them, sometimes with phone cords, scarves, or her bare hands, and steal personal belongings. Her victims were found with signs of a violent struggle, and the city was gripped with fear for years. What made her crimes even more chilling was the motive: deep personal rage. Juana's own mother had given her away to an abusive man in exchange for alcohol when she was just a child. This betrayal left her with a lifelong hatred of older women, especially those who reminded her of her mother. Psychologists later confirmed that her trauma played a major role in her violent behavior. She was finally caught in 2006 while fleeing the scene of her last murder. At trial, Juana showed little remorse, offering excuses but no real apology. In 2008, she was sentenced to 759 years in prison, one of the longest sentences in Mexican history. Juana Barraza was more than a killer. She was a symbol of how unchecked trauma and hatred can twist into monstrous violence. Number 5. Judy Buenoano was a calculated killer known as the Black Widow for poisoning, drowning, and electrocuting her closest family members and partners. Between 1971 and 1980, she murdered her husband, her disabled son, and a boyfriend, all to collect life insurance money. Her crimes began when her husband died mysteriously, later confirmed to be arsenic poisoning. Years later, her paraplegic son drowned during a canoe trip. Suspiciously, she had taken out a large life insurance policy on him. Then, another boyfriend died when his car exploded. Investigators noticed a pattern. Each death followed a new insurance policy and a staged accident. Judy showed no signs of remorse. Her motive was cold financial gain. She wanted control and was willing to kill to get it. Authorities eventually pieced the cases together, uncovering her long trail of deadly manipulation. In 1983, Judy was convicted of her son's murder and sentenced to death. She was also found guilty of attempted murder and grand theft related to her other victims. Throughout her trial and years on death row, Judy remained emotionless, never confessing or apologizing. On March 30th, 1998, Judy Buenoano was executed in Florida's electric chair, the first woman executed in the state in over 150 years. To the very end, she offered only silence, leaving behind a legacy of betrayal and cold-blooded murder. Number 6. Diane Downs was a former postal worker and mother from Oregon who shocked the nation in 1983 when she shot her 3 children, killing one and critically injuring the other 2. She claimed they were victims of a carjacking, saying a bushy-haired stranger flagged her down and opened fire. But her story quickly unraveled. Evidence showed no sign of a struggle or forced entry, and her calm demeanor raised suspicion. Most damning was the diary she kept, revealing an obsessive love for a married man who didn't want children. Detectives concluded she shot her kids to free herself for this man. Her 7-year-old daughter, despite being paralyzed, testified that her mother was the shooter. Diane was arrested and convicted of murder and attempted murder, receiving a life sentence plus 50 years. But in 1987, she escaped from prison and was on the run for 10 days before being caught. Psychological evaluations diagnosed her as a narcissist with antisocial and histrionic traits. Even in prison, Diane showed no remorse, continuing to deny the crime and spinning bizarre stories in interviews. Her disturbing lack of empathy and willingness to sacrifice her own children for personal gain earned her a permanent place among the most evil women in American criminal history. Number 7. Karla Homolka was one of the most reviled women in Canadian criminal history. In the early 1990s, she and her husband, Paul Bernardo, formed a deadly duo responsible for the rape, torture, and murder of at least 3 teenage girls. One of the victims was Karla's own sister, Tammy Homolka, who died after Karla drugged her and presented her to Bernardo as a gift. They filmed the assaults. Karla was not just an accomplice. She actively participated, luring victims and helping control them during the crimes. When police closed in, Karla struck a plea deal, claiming she was an abused spouse forced to help. In exchange for testifying against Paul, she was given only 12 years in prison. But when videotapes of the crimes were discovered showing Karla as a willing participant, public outrage exploded. The press called it the deal with the devil. Despite the horror, the deal stood. Karla was released in 2005 and changed her name, later marrying and having children. She has since lived in relative freedom, though under public scrutiny and surveillance. Psychologists labeled her as cold, calculating, and possibly a psychopath. Karla Homolka never offered a sincere apology and has never fully accepted responsibility for the brutality of her crimes. To this day, many see her not as a victim, but as a manipulator who gamed the system to escape true justice. Number 8. Velma Barfield was a notorious American serial killer known as the Tombstone Killer because many of her victims were elderly people whose deaths were initially thought to be natural. Born in 1932 in North Carolina, Velma's early life was marked by hardship and abuse. She struggled with instability, and by adulthood, she was working as a nurse's aide, a job that gave her access to vulnerable patients who trusted her care. It was this trust she would betray in the most chilling way possible. Velma's method of killing was slow and calculated. She used arsenic poisoning to end the lives of those around her. Her first victim was her own husband, who died after years of marriage filled with turmoil. But Velma's killing spree didn't stop there. Over time, she poisoned other family members, friends, and patients, often slowly enough that their deaths were mistaken for natural causes. This earned her the grim nickname Tombstone Killer. Authorities only began to suspect foul play after a pattern of suspicious deaths in her circle emerged, prompting investigations and toxicology tests that revealed elevated arsenic levels. In total, Velma confessed to killing 6 people, though some experts believe the number could be higher. Her motives were a disturbing blend of financial gain and psychological compulsion. She often targeted victims to collect life insurance money or inherit property. Velma's trial in 1984 was a national spectacle, as she became the first woman in North Carolina to be sentenced to death. Unlike many killers, Velma showed genuine remorse during her trial, expressing regret for her actions and seeking redemption through Christianity. Despite this, she was executed by lethal injection later that year, becoming the first woman executed in the U.S. since 1962. Velma Barfield's case remains one of the most chilling examples of a caregiver-turned-killer, showing how evil can lurk beneath a seemingly kind and caring exterior. Number 9. Martha Ann Johnson was a Georgia mother whose name became infamous in the early 1980s after a shocking pattern of infant deaths in her home drew the attention of authorities. Between 1977 and 1982, 4 of Martha's children died mysteriously, each death initially ruled as natural or unexplained. But beneath the surface was a horrifying truth. Martha had smothered each of them, typically just after having an argument with one of her husbands. The children, aged from just weeks old to 3 years, were all killed in similar ways, often while they were sleeping. One of her daughters, Tabitha, was found blue and lifeless in her crib. Another child, James, was believed to have suffocated between a mattress and wall. The causes of death were initially written off as sudden infant death syndrome or accidents, but suspicions grew as more children died in quick succession under Martha's care. The turning point came when her third husband cooperated with investigators, leading to the exhumation of the bodies. Forensic experts began to notice inconsistencies in the original causes of death. Eventually, in 1989, Martha confessed to smothering 2 of the children by sitting on them as a punishment. She claimed it was a reaction to the stress in her life. But the prosecutors argued she committed the murders to punish or manipulate her spouses during arguments. Martha Ann Johnson was convicted of first-degree murder in the death of her 11-month-old daughter and sentenced to life in prison. She showed little emotion during the trial and has never offered a full public apology. To this day, her crimes stand as one of the most chilling cases of maternal filicide in American history. A woman who killed her own children not out of desperation, but to gain control over her romantic relationships. Number 10. Kimberley McCarthy was a former occupational therapist and nursing home worker from Texas, whose crimes shocked the nation. Born in 1961, she seemed like a woman on the right path. Educated, articulate, and once married to a prominent civil rights attorney. But behind the scenes, her life had spiraled into drug addiction and desperation. On July 21, 1997, McCarthy committed a horrifying act of violence that would seal her fate. She targeted her 71-year-old neighbor, Dorothy Booth, a retired college professor who lived alone. Pretending she needed to borrow some sugar, Kimberley gained access to Dorothy's home. Once inside, she viciously attacked her with a candelabra, stabbed her repeatedly with a butcher knife, and finally severed her left ring finger to steal her diamond wedding ring. She then pawned the ring and used the money to buy crack cocaine. Police discovered DNA evidence, stolen items, and pawn shop records that led directly to McCarthy. During the investigation, detectives began to suspect she was involved in the unsolved murders of 2 other elderly women from 1988, both of whom had been similarly beaten, stabbed, and robbed. Although she was never tried for those cases, the pattern was disturbingly similar. Vulnerable women, isolated settings, and brutal violence, followed by theft. Prosecutors described Kimberley as manipulative and cold, using her background in healthcare to gain trust before turning on her victims. Her defense argued she was under the influence of drugs and not in her right mind, but the jury saw through it. McCarthy was convicted in 1998 and sentenced to death. Over the years, she appealed her case multiple times, claiming racial bias and ineffective counsel, but the courts upheld her sentence. On June 26, 2013, she was executed by lethal injection at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville. Her death marked a grim milestone. She was the 500th person executed in Texas since the death penalty was reinstated in 1982. Kimberley McCarthy's story is chilling not only for its brutality, but because it shows how someone seemingly educated and professional can descend into calculated evil. Her crimes were not crimes of passion. They were acts of cold, desperate exploitation, committed under the mask of trust and familiarity. Number 11. Emilia Carr appeared to be a typical Florida mother, raising her children and living a quiet life. But in 2009, her name became forever tied to one of the most disturbing murders in the state's recent history. Alongside her boyfriend, Joshua Fulgham, Emilia committed a brutal and calculated crime fueled by jealousy, obsession, and manipulation. The victim was Heather Strong, Joshua's estranged wife, and the mother of his children. What started as a bitter custody battle turned into a cold-blooded murder when Emilia and Joshua lured Heather into a storage trailer. There, they restrained her with duct tape, forced her into a chair, and suffocated her by placing a plastic bag over her head while she struggled for air. Emilia was accused of helping hold Heather down during the murder. After the killing, the pair left Heather's body hidden in the trailer for days before burying her in a shallow grave nearby. Investigators were shocked by the cruelty of the act. Emilia tried to paint herself as a victim, saying Joshua had threatened her and coerced her into the killing. But wiretapped conversations between Emilia and her mother revealed that she had discussed the murder beforehand, indicating premeditation. During her trial, prosecutors portrayed her as a manipulative woman who was deeply obsessed with Joshua and willing to eliminate anyone in her way. The jury agreed, and Emilia was sentenced to death in 2011, making her one of the few women on Florida's death row. However, in 2017, her sentence was commuted to life imprisonment without parole after a retrial. The judge cited her background, including childhood abuse and a history of trauma, but still upheld her guilt in the murder. Today, Emilia Carr sits in prison, a chilling reminder of how love twisted by obsession can turn into something monstrous. Her story is not just about murder, but about a woman who abandoned her humanity in a desperate bid to keep control over a man who was never truly hers. The crime devastated multiple families and left a permanent scar on the lives of everyone involved. Number 12. Kristen Gilbert was once a respected nurse at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Northampton, Massachusetts. But behind her professional smile lurked a dark obsession. Between 1995 and 1996, hospital staff began to notice an eerie pattern. Deaths surged during Kristen's shifts, more than any other nurse on the floor. Her patients, mostly elderly veterans, often died of sudden heart failure. What no one realized at first was that Kristen had been injecting them with lethal doses of epinephrine, a drug that can trigger cardiac arrest when misused. She would then discover the emergency, heroically calling codes and attempting resuscitation, often in front of other staff. This disturbing behavior earned her the nickname Angel of Death. Her motive? Investigators believed she did it to gain attention and sympathy, particularly from a fellow hospital security guard with whom she had a romantic relationship. In total, Kristen was suspected of being involved in over 30 deaths, though she was only charged with 4 murders and 2 attempted murders. During her 2001 trial, prosecutors painted her as manipulative and cold. They revealed chilling evidence, including co-workers' testimonies and medical records, that showed a spike in deaths when Kristen was on duty. The jury found her guilty, and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Kristen never confessed, and she has shown no public remorse for her actions. Once trusted with saving lives, she turned a hospital ward into her hunting ground. Her story is a terrifying reminder that not all killers lurk in the shadows. Some wear scrubs and smile while they kill. Number 13. Christine Falling was a disturbed child killer from Florida who gained national attention in the early 1980s for a horrifying string of infant deaths. Born in 1963 in Perry, Florida, Christine's early life was marked by extreme poverty, neglect, and a deeply dysfunctional family. She was known for killing animals as a child, especially cats, claiming that she heard voices commanding her to do so. By age 9, she had already shown signs of serious mental illness, including hallucinations and blackouts. At 14, she married a man twice her age, but the relationship lasted just 6 weeks due to her erratic behavior and violent outbursts. Afterward, Christine found work as a babysitter and caregiver. Between 1980 and 1982, 5 children and 1 elderly man died while under her supervision. All the deaths were initially ruled natural or unexplained, causes like meningitis, epilepsy, or sudden infant death syndrome. But there was a common pattern. All victims were perfectly healthy before being left alone with Christine, and all died mysteriously shortly after. Her final victim was a 3-year-old girl named Cassidy Johnson, who died just hours after being left in Christine's care. The autopsy revealed internal injuries inconsistent with an accidental fall, prompting authorities to investigate more deeply. During questioning, Christine confessed to smothering several of the children using pillows, blankets, or even her hands. Her reasoning was chilling. She claimed the children annoyed her with their crying, and she felt compelled by unseen forces to silence them. She also stated she had spells and was afraid of losing control. In 1982, she pleaded guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison. At just 19 years old, she became one of the youngest female serial killers in American history. Although eligible for parole after 25 years, she has been repeatedly denied release due to the disturbing nature of her crimes. Christine Falling remains in prison today, a tragic example of untreated mental illness spiraling into deadly violence. Her story shocked Florida and the nation, especially because the victims were so young and vulnerable. In a system that failed to catch the warning signs early, Christine was allowed to become a trusted caregiver and used that trust to commit monstrous acts. Number 14. Waneta Hoyt was a seemingly gentle and grieving mother from New York who became the center of a horrifying case of serial infanticide. Between 1965 and 1971, she lost all 5 of her biological children, Eric, James, Julie, Molly, and Noah, each death labeled as sudden infant death syndrome and SIDS. Her tragedy drew sympathy, and she was even consulted in Society's research, believed to be a heartbreaking example of the mysterious condition. But behind closed doors, something far more sinister was happening. The truth began to unravel in the early 1990s when forensic pathologist Dr. Lyndon Norton reviewed the children's medical records and noticed disturbing patterns inconsistent with SIDS. Under pressure from law enforcement and confronted with mounting evidence, Waneta confessed to smothering each of her children to stop their crying. She claimed she couldn't bear the sound and snapped under the stress of young motherhood. Each baby had been murdered in a similar fashion, quietly, at home, while no one else was watching. Her confession shocked the nation. It challenged years of assumptions about unexplained infant deaths and exposed the dark possibility of Munchausen syndrome by proxy or extreme maternal psychological distress. Waneta Hoyt was arrested in 1994 and charged with 5 counts of second-degree murder. During her trial, she tried to recant her confession, saying it was coerced. However, the jury found her guilty, and she was sentenced to 75 years in prison, 15 years for each child. She died of cancer in prison in 1998 at the age of 52. Her case is one of the most haunting in American criminal history. A mother who betrayed the most sacred bond by taking the lives she was meant to protect. Waneta Hoyt's story continues to be studied in criminal psychology and forensic circles as a chilling example of maternal filicide and manipulation masked by grief. Number 15. Leonarda Cianciulli was one of Italy's most notorious female serial killers, nicknamed the soap maker of Correggio. Born in 1894 in Sicily, Leonarda endured a lifetime of hardship marked by domestic violence, poverty, and superstition. Deeply superstitious, she believed human sacrifice could protect her sons during World War II and prevent their deaths. Between 1939 and 1940, Leonarda lured 3 women, 2 of whom had helped her with a job placement, into her home with the promise of finding work. Once inside, she murdered them using a kitchen knife, dismembered their bodies, and boiled parts of them to make soap and tea cakes. She then buried the remnants under her kitchen floor. Her motives were rooted in dark folk beliefs and a desperate desire for protection. Her crimes weren't discovered until neighbors noted strange odors and police found her victims' remains. During her trial in 1946, Leonarda gave chilling testimony. She admitted to killing but insisted she did it to protect my sons. She expressed no remorse in the traditional sense, only regret at not using more victims to reinforce her ritual. Psychiatrists diagnosed her with psychopathic and delusional traits. Leonarda was sentenced to 30 years in prison and ordered to undergo 3 years in a mental institution. She died in custody in 1970. Her gruesome case shocked Italy, blending elements of superstition, maternal obsession, and ritual murder. Leonarda Cianciulli's legacy remains a dark footnote in criminal history, proof that twisted beliefs and desperation can push a seemingly ordinary person to commit horrifying acts. Number 16. Jolly Joseph was once seen as a kind, soft-spoken woman in the quiet village of Kudathai, Kerala, India. But beneath her calm demeanor lay a chilling secret. She was a calculated serial killer responsible for the deaths of 6 people over 14 years. Her victims were all close family members, including her first husband, his parents, his uncle, and 2 others, each murdered through cyanide poisoning. Her crimes began in 2002 with the sudden death of her mother-in-law, Anama Thomas, after a bowl of mutton soup. Everyone thought it was natural. In 2008, her father-in-law died mysteriously, followed by her husband Roy Thomas in 2011, whose death was labeled a suicide. But suspicions started to build after her husband's autopsy revealed traces of cyanide, and even more eyebrows were raised when Jolly quickly remarried. She claimed to be a professor and told lies to maintain her image of success and respectability, even forging documents and certificates to back up her fake academic credentials. She even posed as a relative of powerful church officials to gain trust. Jolly's true motives were deeply rooted in greed and ambition. She wanted control over family property, wealth, and status. Investigators believe her desire for a better life and prestige drove her to eliminate anyone who stood in her way. Her careful planning, charming behavior, and the slow pace of deaths helped her avoid suspicion for over a decade. But when relatives began questioning inconsistencies and pushed for deeper investigation, police finally reopened the cases. In 2019, Jolly was arrested, and during intense interrogation, she confessed to all 6 murders. The village was left stunned. How could such a gentle, smiling woman carry out a killing spree over 14 years without getting caught? Her case shocked India and made international headlines. No one suspected the woman serving tea at family functions was secretly slipping poison into every cup. Jolly Joseph's legacy is now one of deceit, betrayal, and a terrifying reminder that evil can wear the friendliest face. Number 17. Anna Mary Hahn was a German-born American serial killer who preyed on elderly men in Cincinnati, Ohio during the 1930s. Her crimes were chilling in their cold calculation. Posing as a devoted caregiver, she earned the trust of lonely elderly bachelors, then poisoned them to steal their savings. Between 1933 and 1937, Anna befriended at least 5 elderly men from the German immigrant community. She would offer help with chores, meals, and medical care. Once she gained their trust, she manipulated them into giving her access to their finances or naming her in their wills. Then she administered fatal doses of arsenic or other poisons, causing rapid, mysterious illnesses that doctors initially believed were natural. Her victims, including Albert Parker and George Obendorfer, were found with high levels of toxins in their bodies after suspicious patterns emerged. The final blow came when Anna traveled with George Obendorfer to Colorado, and he suddenly died. Investigators were alerted, and after an autopsy revealed arsenic poisoning, they reopened the cases of her previous patients. Evidence linked her to at least 5 deaths. Anna was arrested in 1937 and stood trial in one of the most sensational criminal cases of the era. The courtroom was packed as prosecutors painted a picture of a greedy, manipulative woman who took advantage of the vulnerable. She claimed innocence but never explained the poison found in her possession or the money transfers from her victims. The jury found her guilty, and she was sentenced to death. On December 7, 1938, Anna Marie Hahn became the first woman to die in Ohio's electric chair. She showed little emotion in her final moments and never admitted to the murders. Her case shocked the country not only because of her methodical cruelty, but because she wore the mask of a caregiver, a woman entrusted with the well-being of others. Instead, Anna turned trust into a weapon, leaving behind a legacy of deceit, theft, and calculated murder. Number 18. Blanche Taylor Moore was a seemingly sweet Southern woman with a Bible in one hand and poison in the other. Born in North Carolina in 1933, Blanche worked at a grocery store, charmed everyone with her pleasant demeanor, and regularly attended church. But behind her polite smile hid a deadly obsession with arsenic. Her string of suspicious relationships began to raise questions in the 1980s. Her first husband, James Taylor, died in 1973 from what was believed to be a heart attack. Years later, her boyfriend Raymond Reed fell mysteriously ill and died in 1986. Doctors were baffled, but no one suspected foul play at the time. The truth started unraveling in 1989 when her new fiancé, Reverend Dwight Moore, became violently ill just days after proposing to her. A toxicology report revealed his body was loaded with arsenic, nearly 100 times the safe level. He barely survived. Investigators exhumed the bodies of her former partners and found dangerously high levels of arsenic in both. Blanche was arrested and charged with murder and attempted murder. At her trial, prosecutors revealed that Blanche had purchased arsenic-based rat poison in the months before the poisonings and had handled the food and drink consumed by her victims. The jury found her guilty of first-degree murder in Raymond Reed's death, and in 1990, she was sentenced to death. She remains on death row in North Carolina to this day, one of the few women to receive the death penalty in the state. Blanche has never confessed, and her calm, grandmotherly appearance continues to contrast sharply with the cold, methodical nature of her crimes. Her case shocked the nation and became the basis for a 1993 TV movie titled Black Widow Murders: The Blanche Taylor Moore Story. She is often remembered as a chilling example of how someone who appears ordinary, even charming, can harbor a lethal secret. The poison she used was silent, invisible, and slow, much like the trust she gained from her victims before delivering their fatal dose. Number 19. Kelly Cochran was a factory worker and waitress from Michigan and Indiana who lived a seemingly normal life. But beneath that ordinary exterior was a woman capable of chilling violence. In 2014, Kelly and her husband Jason made a gruesome pact. If either of them ever had an affair, the unfaithful partner would have to kill the lover. When Kelly began an affair with a co-worker named Chris Regan, Jason insisted she keep her promise. Kelly lured Chris to her home where Jason shot him. But that wasn't the end. To cover up the crime, they dismembered Chris's body and hid the remains in various locations in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Friends and family reported Chris missing, and the trail eventually led back to Kelly. But things turned darker. Jason died under mysterious circumstances shortly after. Authorities suspected Kelly had murdered her husband too, injecting him with a lethal dose of heroin and then suffocating him. In a twisted confession, Kelly later claimed she had killed at least 9 people in total, though no evidence confirmed this. Her motive? Revenge against her husband for forcing her to kill her lover, and perhaps a darker craving for control and violence. During interviews with police and psychologists, Kelly showed no remorse. Instead, she smiled as she spoke about the killings, even claiming she enjoyed the act of murder. Her demeanor was cold, detached, and at times proud. In 2017, she was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Chris Regan and another 65 years for her husband's death. Kelly Cochran's story is one of deception, manipulation, and brutality hidden behind a friendly smile. She betrayed 2 men who trusted her, one with love, the other with marriage, and turned their lives into pieces for her own twisted satisfaction. Today, she remains behind bars, offering no apologies and no clear answers, only disturbing tales of what she might have done. Number 20. Charlene Gallego, along with her husband Gerald, formed one of the most notorious serial killer couples in American history. Between 1978 and 1980, the Gallegos abducted and murdered at least 10 young women across California, Nevada, and Oregon. Charlene, born in 1956 to a wealthy Sacramento family, appeared quiet and intelligent. But behind her innocent exterior was a woman entangled in a deadly partnership. At first, Charlene claimed she was forced to help Gerald fulfill his dark fantasies, but over time, investigators uncovered evidence showing she was far more involved than she let on. The couple's crimes were chilling. They would lure victims, usually teenage girls, with promises of partying or job opportunities. Once isolated, Gerald would rape and beat the girls while Charlene watched, assisted, and even helped restrain the victims. The Gallegos transported their victims in a van outfitted for abductions and later murdered them, often shooting them before dumping the bodies in remote areas. When caught in 1980, Charlene turned on her husband in exchange for a plea deal. She testified against Gerald in court, helping to convict him, and received a significantly lighter sentence, just 16 years in prison. Gerald was sentenced to death and died of cancer in prison in 2002. Charlene was released in 1997 after serving only her full term, sparking outrage from victims' families and the public. While Charlene has claimed she's moved on and rebuilt her life, many argue that she was not merely a passive accomplice, but an equal participant in the crimes. Her legacy remains controversial. Was she a victim manipulated by a monstrous man, or a willing partner in murder? Despite her release, the shadow of her past continues to follow her, and she remains one of the most disturbing examples of how evil can wear a deceptively innocent face. Number 21. Joanna Dennehy was a British serial killer who stunned the UK with a gruesome killing spree in 2013 that left 3 men dead and 2 more severely injured. Born in 1982 in St. Albans, England, Dennehy didn't appear to be a typical criminal. She came from a seemingly stable middle-class family and was described as intelligent in her youth. However, she developed violent tendencies early on, running away from home as a teenager, abusing alcohol and drugs, and showing an obsession with control and domination. In March 2013, Dennehy began her brutal rampage in Peterborough, England. Her first victim was her housemate Łukasz Slabaszewski, whom she lured and stabbed in the heart. Days later, she killed her landlord, Kevin Lee, and dressed his body in a black sequin dress before dumping him in a ditch. Her third victim, John Chapman, was murdered in a similarly cold-blooded manner. Dennehy didn't stop there. She traveled over 100 miles to Hereford, where she stabbed 2 random men, Robin Bariza and John Rogers, in separate incidents. Miraculously, both survived. What shocked investigators was not just the violence, but Dennehy's attitude. She showed no remorse, laughed during police interviews, and even expressed disappointment that she didn't kill more people. She reportedly told police she killed to see how it felt, and described herself as a male serial killer trapped in a woman's body. Dennehy was diagnosed with psychopathic and antisocial personality disorders. She pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order, meaning she will never be released. Joanna Dennehy is one of only a handful of women in British history to receive such a sentence. Her case remains one of the most chilling examples of female-led serial killings in modern times, driven not by necessity or passion, but by a thrill for bloodshed. Her crimes horrified the nation and left behind a trail of devastation, making her name forever linked to one of the UK's most twisted criminal sagas. Number 22. Miyuki Ishikawa was a Japanese midwife who became one of the most prolific female serial killers in history. Born in 1897, she worked at a maternity hospital in Tokyo during the 1940s, a time when Japan was suffering from the aftermath of World War II. Economic hardship, food shortages, and overpopulation plagued the country. Miyuki began killing newborns, babies born to poor or single mothers who could not afford to care for them. Instead of helping, she let the infants die from neglect, malnutrition, and lack of care. Shockingly, she believed she was performing a public service. Her rationale was that the children would suffer if they lived in poverty, and their deaths were a form of mercy. It's estimated that she may have been responsible for the deaths of over 100 infants, though the official number confirmed was around 85. Even more disturbingly, she and her husband charged the parents' fees for this service, making a profit from the deaths of helpless babies. When the crimes were finally discovered in 1948, the public was outraged. Miyuki Ishikawa was arrested, but the justice system treated her surprisingly leniently. She was sentenced to only 8 years in prison and served just 4. The light sentence was partly due to Japan's chaotic post-war legal system and the widespread belief that the parents were also to blame. Her case sparked debate across the country and eventually led to changes in Japanese child welfare laws. Miyuki Ishikawa's crimes remain a horrifying chapter in Japan's criminal history, one where a caregiver turned into a cold, calculating killer who saw death as a solution to poverty. Number 23. Dena Schlosser was a seemingly ordinary mother living in Plano, Texas, until one of the most horrifying crimes in recent memory revealed the devastating depths of her untreated mental illness. In November 2004, Dena, a stay-at-home mom, took a kitchen knife and severed the arms of her 10-month-old daughter, Margaret. She then calmly called 911 and confessed, saying, "I cut her arms off." When police arrived, they found Dena sitting in her living room, covered in blood, holding the knife, and singing church hymns. Her calm demeanor stunned even the most seasoned officers. Dena had a history of mental health struggles. Her baby's arms. The infant died shortly after the attack. During her trial, Dena was found not guilty by reason of insanity. She was committed to a state mental hospital where she spent several years receiving treatment. The verdict sparked national outrage, with many questioning how someone could commit such a gruesome act and not be held criminally responsible. After years in the institution, Dena was conditionally released under strict supervision and prohibited from contacting her surviving children. Her case remains one of the most shocking examples of filicide, driven by mental illness and religious delusion. The horror of what she did is matched only by the systemic failures that allowed a deeply unstable woman to be left untreated and unsupervised. Dena Schlosser's name is now permanently etched in true crime history, not just as a mother who killed her child, but as a tragic figure in a system that failed both her and her baby. Number 24. Amy Bishop was once seen as a brilliant neurobiologist and professor at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. With a PhD from Harvard and a long trail of academic achievements, no one could have predicted the explosion of violence she would unleash. On February 12, 2010, during a routine biology faculty meeting, Amy pulled out a 9mm handgun and opened fire on her colleagues. She killed 3 fellow professors, Gopi Podila, Adriel Johnson, and Maria Ragland Davis, and seriously injured 3 others. The motive behind this horrifying act was devastatingly personal. Amy had just been denied tenure, a career-ending decision in academia. In a moment of rage and retaliation, she turned the meeting into a bloodbath. But what shocked investigators even more was the disturbing history that followed her. Back in 1986, when Amy was just 21, she shot and killed her own brother, Seth, in their Massachusetts home. She claimed it was an accident, and the case was quickly closed without charges, possibly due to her mother's political influence in the community. After the 2010 shooting, that old case was reopened, but by then, it was too late to bring new charges. Her past also included a violent outburst at an IHOP restaurant in 2002, where she was accused of punching a woman during a dispute over a child's booster seat. Despite these red flags, Amy continued to advance in academia, hiding behind degrees, publications, and her role as a mother of 4. After her arrest, she showed little emotion. Her defense argued she suffered from mental illness, possibly paranoid schizophrenia, but prosecutors saw cold-blooded planning. In 2012, she pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Amy Bishop's case remains one of the most shocking examples of how deep-seated anger, unchecked behavior, and overlooked warning signs can culminate in tragedy. Her story is a chilling reminder that brilliance and madness can sometimes exist in the same person. Behind the facade of a respected scientist was a ticking time bomb that exploded in one of the most unexpected places, a college conference room. Now serving her sentence in Alabama, Bishop continues to be a symbol of how far someone can fall when ambition and mental instability collide without intervention. Number 25, K.D. Kempamma, infamously known as Cyanide Malika, holds the grim title of India's first convicted female serial killer. Between 1999 and 2007, she murdered 6 women across Karnataka using a method both calculated and chilling: cyanide-laced holy water. Kempamma posed as a devout spiritual woman visiting temples and mingling with female devotees. She targeted vulnerable women who appeared troubled or in distress, usually middle-aged or elderly, often dealing with personal problems. After befriending them and earning their trust, she would invite them to accompany her to a secluded temple under the pretense of performing a special ritual to solve their problems. There, she would give them holy water, spiked with cyanide, which she had reportedly obtained by pretending to be a goldsmith kneading it for polishing. The women would collapse almost instantly, and as they died, Kempamma robbed them of their jewelry and valuables before vanishing. Her victims were left either in temple premises or nearby locations, creating an illusion of sudden death during prayer. Police were baffled by the pattern until her arrest in December 2007, when she was caught trying to pawn stolen jewelry from her latest victim. During interrogation, Kempamma showed little emotion. She confessed to all 6 murders, explaining the process with chilling clarity. Her demeanor was cold and matter-of-fact, showing no remorse. The court found her guilty, and in 2010, she was sentenced to death. However, in 2011, the Supreme Court of India commuted the sentence to life imprisonment, citing her gender, age, and the lack of previous criminal history. She now serves her sentence in a women's prison in Karnataka. Her story shocked India and led to increased security measures in religious spaces, with temples installing CCTV cameras and issuing public warnings about spiritual imposters. K.D. Kempamma shattered the myth that serial killing is a male domain. Her crimes were not of passion or mental illness alone, but were motivated by greed and executed with methodical precision. She is remembered not only for her brutality, but for the way she used religious faith and female trust as her tools of manipulation and murder, making her one of the most disturbing figures in India's criminal history. Number 26, Belle Gunness, was one of the most terrifying female serial killers in American history. Born Brynhild Paulsdatter Storseth in 1859 in Norway, she immigrated to the United States and began a dark legacy of murder that spanned decades. She is believed to have killed between 14 and 40 people, including husbands, suitors, children, and acquaintances. Her method was chilling: lure victims with personal ads promising marriage or companionship, poison, or bludgeon them, and dispose of their bodies on her Indiana farm. She often targeted wealthy men, convincing them to bring money before vanishing forever. Belle's first husband died mysteriously shortly after 2 insurance policies were taken out in his name. Her second husband supposedly died in a kitchen accident, crushed by a sausage grinder. Neighbors began to suspect her, but no action was taken. Her victims continued to disappear. One of the most tragic aspects of her crimes was her own children. Several died young under suspicious circumstances. Belle would often tell neighbors that her children had died of illness, but many believe she killed them herself. In 1908, her farmhouse burned down. In the ruins, authorities discovered the bodies of her children and a decapitated female corpse. Although presumed to be Belle, the body's size did not match her known description. This sparked theories that she faked her death and escaped. Investigators began digging up her property and uncovered a mass grave with at least 11 dismembered bodies. One of her suitors, Andrew Helgelien, had come looking for answers. His brother's letter led authorities to the farm. Belle's farm became known as Murder Farm. Her handyman, Ray Lamphere, confessed that Belle had planned the fire, faked her death, and fled. He claimed to have helped her dispose of bodies and burn the house down, but she vanished without a trace. Sightings of Belle were reported for years, but none were confirmed. She remains a ghostly figure in true crime history. Her motives appeared to be greed, manipulation, and control. Belle Gunness used charm and social norms to mask her monstrous nature, proving that sometimes the most dangerous killers hide in plain sight, behind a smile and a warm home. Number 27. Vera Renczi was a Romanian serial killer who gained infamy in the 1920s for murdering her husbands and possibly numerous lovers using arsenic. Born in 1903 in Budapest into Hungarian aristocracy, Vera was known for her beauty, charm, and magnetic presence. She married multiple times, and each of her husbands mysteriously disappeared or died. She also had a long list of lovers, many of whom were never seen again. The pattern was always the same. Once Vera suspected infidelity or feared abandonment, she would poison her partner with arsenic-laced food or wine. Her motive wasn't wealth or revenge, it was a toxic obsession with loyalty and control. Vera wanted absolute possession over her partners, even if it meant killing them. Her villa in Berkeracul, then part of Yugoslavia, became a house of horrors. When police finally raided the property, they discovered a locked cellar with a long row of zinc-lined coffins. Over 30 bodies were found, including her husband's, lovers, and even her own son, whom she reportedly murdered after he discovered her crimes and threatened to expose her. During interrogation, Vera admitted everything with chilling calmness. She said she killed out of love and a deep fear of betrayal. She claimed she would rather see her men dead than unfaithful or distant. At her trial in 1931, she was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, where she eventually died in the 1960s. She showed no remorse and never apologized for her crimes. Vera Renczi's case became one of the most shocking examples of female serial killing in Europe. She was dubbed the Black Widow of Berkeracul by the media, a woman who turned romance into a death sentence. Her story has since inspired books, documentaries, and fictional characters. What makes her particularly terrifying is the blend of elegance and evil. She operated with such grace and manipulation that no one suspected her until it was far too late. Vera didn't fit the typical image of a killer, which made her all the more dangerous. Her legacy is a haunting reminder that killers can hide behind charm, beauty, and the illusion of love.